Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Bitcoin Mentor Q&A. As always, I'm Ed, behind the lid-free BTC handle. Today, we're joined here by Nathan on the Bitcoin Mentor handle, and our special guest today is Aleksandar Svetski. If at any point you'd like to come up and ask a question, rant or rave about Bitcoin, we'd love to have you. How you guys doing today?
I'm doing very well, Ed. I'm doing fairly well. How are you doing this afternoon?
Not too bad, not too bad. It's day before a holiday, so, just getting all that stuff together. It's just going to be me and the immediate family, so not a lot, but it'll be nice.
That's wonderful. What are you guys going to do? Is it just in town and no folks or anything nearby?
Yeah, no folks nearby, so it's just going to be me, the wife, and the kid. So, yeah, just making, standard Thanksgiving dinner here in the U.S., the turkey, the stuffing, the potatoes, all that good stuff.
Yeah, nice. You doing it all
Yourself?
yourself, I will be doing? Well, none of that. My Thanksgiving was a couple months ago, but I was just realizing it's like I think I still have 2 turkeys in the freezer. I know one saved for Christmas, but it's like I might bust out the other one. For me, I think it's just going to be a busy weekend. Full of just trying to catch up on work and stuff too. I feel like I've had a lot on the plate lately, so I need to just kind of sit down and get through some of our old recordings and stuff as well too. Got a few sessions booked this week, so it should be absolutely delightful.
That's awesome. Yeah, good to hear. So you guys don't do Canada doesn't do like the American Thanksgiving at all. I figure.
No, we are in September. I think I'm trying to remember what day ours is right now, but our Thanksgiving is in September, so we're just like a couple months behind you. So it makes sense that we would also, break 100K before you because we're just a little bit early. I imagine you're going to do it this weekend, perhaps.
Yeah, hopefully. Sooner than later, it looks like it's climbing back up. So
I see we've got Svetski. I'm just going to invite him up to speak, and I'm going to send this out as well too.
excellent.
Svetski sent you an invite whenever you're ready. In the meantime, we will just chill out. Looks like we had a little bit of price action this morning. It's kind of interesting. Got up to about 96.5 at the moment. Ed, anything on your radar this morning?
Yeah, I kind of saw that as well. I think that it's funny that we see it go up to 96 where it was less than a week ago, I think now.
Yeah.
And
Everyone
people are
panicked
like,
from
oh,
the
it's
crash.
pumping again. Yeah, it's like crash and pump when it's really like not even that much of a difference.
Svetski, I see we've got you up here, my friend. How are you doing this afternoon?
Hey guys, good. Sorry, the invite didn't actually work initially, so I had to do it myself, but it's all good. Here I am. I'm doing good.
Oh, no worries.
No worries.
Spaces is always so unbelievably busy. Buggy. Yeah.
It really.
Well, we're waiting for people to kind of pile into the room, kind of find their way here. I was hoping you could just start us off with telling us a little bit about you and the things that you're working on right now.
Man, so I guess some people have called me the busiest guy in Bitcoin, which is hilarious because I'm always working on some stupidity. I have actively attempted to eliminate the things that I'm working on. So I've stopped writing for Bitcoin Magazine. I stopped writing for Zero Hedge. I've even given the Bitcoin Times away. Canute is going to be picking that up with Luke and the Freedom Footprint guys, and I'm going to be handing the reins over to them on that to allow me to focus on basically two things in my life. I've kind of condensed everything down to Atlantis, which we're trying to build like a social network travel app for sovereign individuals, and Bushido of Bitcoin, my new book, and everything that entails, which I'm sure we'll get into in this discussion. So they're the two things, trying to get rid of everything else because I'm too old for this shit, I'm too tired, and I'm too fucking grumpy. So that's all I want to do, two things.
Let's start with it's Atlantis, correct? Could you start by unpacking that a bit for us and letting us know what you're working on there?
Yeah, so originally how it started off was I was in El Salvador and I was there for Adopting Bitcoin. My wife and I were there and she wanted a coffee, and we jumped on Google Maps and we found a coffee place with like a 4.8 rating. We went there and the coffee fucking sucked. I'm like, God damn it. So we did the same thing the next day. That coffee sucked too. We did the next day. That sucked too. And we're like, you know what? This whole Google thing's a mad scam. And like her and I, we did a lot of traveling over the years, and it's always the case with online reviews. They're either fake or they're irrelevant or whatever the case is. So the way we ended up finding a good coffee in the end in Salvador was somebody recommended. And I thought, man, I wish this was like an app where there was like some recommendations or something like that. So the idea hit me, and the original incarnation of it was called Destination Bitcoin. The idea was something along the lines of, could we create an app that basically connected Bitcoin cities and the best of like all the Bitcoin stuff, whether it was meetups or conferences or BTC accepting merchants or people, all that sort of stuff, onto some sort of online community, but build it on Nostr. So that way we had a bit of a social graph element there. So people could follow each other, they could share stuff, they could do all sorts of things. So that was kind of the original premise. And it was called Destination Bitcoin, as I mentioned. But as we started building features, as we started doing things, we realized, holy shit, there's so much more here. This is broader than just Bitcoin. There's like an opportunity here to build a really well curated map for sovereign individuals. We could bring in things like all the seed oil free places. We could bring in the farmers markets. We could bring in the stuff that is like direct from the rancher to your table. We could, bring in local picks, right? So people who have lived there or that are expats and stuff like that could help curate elements of the map so that you can go to really cool places. And we could do a whole lot more with events, right? We could build out a whole, even an event app. So when people go to a Bitcoin conference, they've always got those like shitty apps where, you can message someone to network, like, and they all fucking suck. What if we could like have the conference actually on there? They can post content, they can update, but people can also communicate, they can connect, they can put satellite events up and all this sort of stuff. So slowly by slowly, it turned into this almost, I guess the lack of a better term here, it's like a nomad sovereign individual super app. Like there's all sorts of stuff. So like on the mobile, it's supposed to look and feel very much like Instagram with a bunch of other features. And on the web, it looks and feels a little bit like Nomad List, but with social and dynamic component to it. So yeah, I'm dumb enough to attempt to build a fucking super app, and it's literally killing me, but it's very much worthwhile because I think I genuinely found my ikigai. This is something that I wish I had when I was nomading and traveling the world and being a Bitcoiner and going to conferences and stuff. So I'm kind of like building something for my past self and somewhat to my current self, because I still love to eat at really good places and find great restaurants and stuff like that. And that is still a very difficult thing to do. It's an unsolved problem. So yeah, we're trying to build something. We're trying to take a new approach to a product and an age-old problem. And we're trying to kind of do something which I think is lacking in the Bitcoin space, which is we're trying to build a Bitcoin company, but have Bitcoin and Nostr under the hood. So it's not immediately visible on the top. Like I think I'm tired of another fucking exchange and another wallet and another mining app. And I kind of like what the guys at Orange Pill app have done to some degree, but it's still way too Bitcoin for me. Like it's way too in your face, and I think it's a bit fucking creepy. And then also like reminds me a little bit of like Grindr for Bitcoin, because I don't know, like it's a bunch of dudes on there and reaching out, say, hey, you want to grab a coffee? I'm like, yeah, not really, bro. So
it definitely skews to one sex for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, that's the long and short of it, lads. That's what I'm trying to do. We'll find out in the next 12 months whether I'm insane or whether it's something.
Curious what the thoughts are for the next 12 months. Ed, I'll let you jump in there in a second. I just wanted to point out, as I say, that perhaps it's just me not paying attention, but I felt very much so since the most recent book came out that I haven't seen you on much of like the podcast circuit or posting in these things too. And so I imagine, yeah, you're just absolutely grinding away at this. That's where all your time and focus is going.
Pretty much, man. It's been between the book and this. Like, I mean, I wrote the goddamn book 8 fucking times. Like the final version was the 8th draft, and yeah, man, I got consumed with like actually building stuff and doing stuff in the real world, which has been good. I mean, one could argue that I've missed probably a lot of potential growth on socials and stuff like that. But hey, it can't be everywhere at once, and I'm gonna start getting back on that circuit very soon.
100%. Well, we only time is anything more scarce than our sats. But Ed, I believe I interrupted you, and BKC, I know you've been patient here. We'll get a chance to go to you in just a moment.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment on Satlantis because I really like the app, and I think that it was a long time coming, having like something different than a Twitter clone on Nostr. So I really do appreciate that, and I think that you were mentioning Orange Pill app. I think that they should definitely transition over to Nostr if they could, because I love that I can just go on to Satlantis and I instantly have all of my my social graph is right there. Yeah. So I can see like immediately, oh, I actually know a couple Bitcoiners that are in like Barcelona or something if I'm going there, and that adds a lot of value right out of the gate. And you don't have to sign up for another, make another login, email, password, just to use an app. So hugely appreciate what you're doing there. And I'm looking at expanding what I do in my own little city here and putting it on there because I think it's a great resource. And right now, yeah, it's only Bitcoiners, but I think that we can, still reach that broader audience as Nostr grows, right? So
Totally.
it's kind of where I'm seeing it.
Yeah. And I will say something there just in defense of Matteo and the Orange Pill app guys, is that Nostr is very difficult to build on. And I think we would have had an app in market months ago had we not chosen to build on Nostr. And I think that's probably why Matteo and the guys chose to go that way, because Nostr is still very much in flux. Like, you build something and then the spec doesn't fucking work. And then, there's all this talk about interoperability. And then you realize that nobody's actually using the standards and everyone's building shit slightly differently. So then nothing is actually interoperable. And then you got to try and corral everybody to build shit in the right way. And then you got to establish a new spec and standard. So it's it's probably been more detrimental to us than it's been positive. So, I'm actually in the process of writing an article now called As Nostr as Possible. And I'm going to move forward with a bit of a new motto for us as a business. And maybe this will inspire other people in the Nostr community that are trying to build stuff to think about it differently, which is, we don't have to be it makes sense to be a Bitcoin purist because all other money is a scam. Whereas I don't know if it makes sense to be a Nostr purist in the sense that you have to build everything compatible with Nostr. Like, our first version of Atlantis, everything is compatible with Nostr. The cities are an event type. The events and the meetups and whatever are an event type. The chat is a Nostr event type. Everything is a fucking event type. And what that's done is, as I said, increase the technical load 10x, and it's made the app not only slow but clunky. And our original vision there was, okay, this is great because now, this is this data, this information is available across the entire Nostr network, etc. But lo and behold, the only application that can read any of this data is fucking Atlantis. So it's we did all this extra work for ourselves. It was kind of masochistic in a way. So we're going to kind of take a slightly different approach, which is, all right, what is really good about Nostr? Well, you've got your identity, you've got your follower graph, and honestly, probably kind one events, the ability to post social posts and broadcast it across the network. Beyond that, all of the other scopes, all the other specs is all fucking shifting, changing, malleable, all this sort of stuff. And I don't think there's any need for us to do all of it on Nostr. So we're gonna slightly change the approach and still be a Nostr-based app, but do it more intelligently. And yeah, to kind of tie that back into what Orange Pill app has built and what they've done is, their IP is in their product, and it's much smoother, it's cleaner, and all that sort of stuff. Yes, it's lacking the social element, which I think, honestly, for their app is probably a bad idea. But I don't know. Maybe they'll change that. Maybe they'll fix that. Maybe they won't. Maybe, if we do what we're doing right, maybe that doesn't. I say this in a nice way, but maybe there doesn't really need to be much of a need for something like Orange Pill app. I don't know. Or maybe we can integrate them into what we're doing. I don't know. There's multiple universes, multiple pathways here, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, I'll shut up with the final comment that Nostr is hard to build on, and it's very easy to get carried away and tangle yourself up into knots, which we kind of did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that doing any kind of software project is extremely hard nowadays when you're trying to consider all the platforms it's going to run on, even just any web stuff especially. But yeah, I think everybody's going to find their own solution that fits, right? So
Totally.
I think I see BKC dropped here, but maybe we could switch over to talking about your book, Bushido of Bitcoin. I read a little bit about it, and it definitely I read a little bit of the book. I have the book right now. I was interested when listening to all of you. I haven't finished it yet, but listening to all of your appearances and the things that you advertised it as, it's very interesting. I like the idea of considering the future of Bitcoiners and not just Bitcoin. Assuming Bitcoin is inevitable, what are we going to do, right? And everything from the structure of government and communities to just individual morals and ethics, I think is a fascinating topic. I've always been interested in philosophy. So maybe you could just give us a quick rundown of the premise and thesis of Bushido of Bitcoin and what it's all about.
Sure. So when I first started writing the book, the idea came from a discussion between Eric Kaysen and I on my old podcast when I used to do the Wake Up podcast, and the episode ended up being called Bushido of Bitcoin, not because I wanted to write a book or anything like that, but we had been discussing a book called Shogun, which is now a TV show that I think a bunch of people are more familiar with. But it was written by a guy called James Clavell, brilliant fucking author, and it goes back to the Warring States period in Japan, right? I think before the Battle of Sekigahara, where Japan is unified under one supreme leader called the Shogun. And what we were reminiscing on, because it was around that time that this idea of a Bushido came about, and what the word means is way of the warriors, and the closest Western equivalent is like chivalry, right? So what we were discussing with Case and I was like, is there a kind of emergent Bushido? Is there an emergent code of virtue or a moral code that is coming out of the Bitcoin space? And that was kind of the original premise of the conversation, even the original premise of the book. But as I started writing, the book evolved, and it evolved a lot. Like as I started going down the rabbit hole, and I became a bit disillusioned with the standard Bitcoiner arguments about Bitcoin fucking fixes everything apparently, and all we have to do is buy Bitcoin and sit there, and the world is going to be all fucking sunshine and rainbows. And some part of me just couldn't buy that, and I started digging into history further. And as I did that, I realized that there was more to the picture than just fixing the money. And I decided to take a different approach, which was, okay, what were the virtues that were embedded inside the cultures that established the greatest civilizations on Earth? So the way I kind of looked at it was, what's upstream of civilization is culture, and what's upstream of culture is behavior. And you can think of virtues as like some blend of behavior and principles, right? Like those two things together is essentially what a virtue is. It's a bit different to a value, right? A value is something you want, whereas a virtue is more something you do. It's an act, it's something you embody. So anyway, as I started digging into that, the draft 2, 3, 4 was, became this kind of like longing for the past. I was like, holy shit, the Japanese culture was like this, and the Romans were like this, and the Greeks were like this, and the Macedonians were like that, and the Christian West and everything, that they embodied. And I started finding these like overlaps amongst the virtues across all of these cultures. And, that was the stuff that built these civilizations. And when they moved away from these virtues, when almost like the merchant class rose up and the warrior class died away, all of these cultures seem to have collapsed, and they sort of collapsed into debauchery. And there's this sort of quote about ancient Rome, which is they used to fight with iron, and then they came to fight with gold. And it was when they fought with gold that the civilization collapsed. So it was very interesting period for me, and it was funny. It coincided with Clown World sort of reaching an apex point, 2023. And I looked back on those drafts a couple months ago when I was polishing up the final version of the book, and it was very like nostalgic. I was like, sorry, not nostalgic, like kind of yearning for the past. I was like very much thinking the past was better, and than the present, and the future looks bleak, and we need to return to a better time. But somewhere along the line, and it would have been, I think, earlier this year, where I came into like a 5th draft, and a lot of that came from the readings of Nietzsche and some other philosophers like Spengler and Evola and stuff like that, which are not very well known in the Bitcoin space, that started to like light a new kind of fire inside of me. And the book slowly transformed, and it kind of like, I don't know, it changed me. And as it changed me, I changed the book. And then as I changed the book changed me, and all this sort of stuff. And I came to basically take the biggest fucking white pill I've ever taken in my life. And the book took on a ascendant tone. And I think I should credit my editor for that. He's one of the best writers alive today. He goes by a name called John Carter on Substack. He writes Postcards from Barsoom, Barsoom. You guys should check out his writing. Like, if you think Bitcoiners write well, like, this guy writes 1 billion times fucking better than any Bitcoiner on the fucking planet. Like, puts us all to shame. So I got him on after a bunch of cajoling to be my editor, and with his help and prodding and nudging and pushing, the book sort of transformed once again. Draft 6, draft 7, and finally draft 8, where I finally decided to actually publish the damn thing. Otherwise, I'd be doing this for another 10 years. And yeah, the book has sort of become a playbook. And forgive like the whole story here. I kind of gave you my life story, but I thought it was necessary to kind of give people the context of the book and where it came from and, you know, how it got to where it was. But it has become like a calling card, which is trying to answer the question, when Bitcoin wins, who do we become? Because clearly the virtues that we embody as individuals matter, because they are what underpin the culture, which is what underpins the civilization. If we want to build an ascendant civilization, not a fucking decadent one, we have to do that. And Bitcoin's not going to fix it for us. It's like we Bitcoiners who are going to become the socioeconomic elite of the world. It is our duty to sort this shit out and to set the standard. So that's what I look at doing. So this isn't, you know, Svetski's 10 fucking commandments. This is the virtues that I extracted from the greatest cultures and where I found the most overlap. And they're the 10 that I selected. And I go into each of them etymologically, philosophically, historically, psychologically, all this sort of stuff. Like I pull from sources that I can almost guarantee that 99.9% of Bitcoiners are unfamiliar with, like Alfred Adler, who I call like the Austrian economics equivalent of psychology. He's the forgotten psychologist because his psychology revolves around personal responsibility. I pull on, you know, the Spenglers of the world, who once again, most people won't know, but he was the father of the cyclical theory of society and civilization long before the clowns who wrote The Fourth Turning. Like, so there's all this like really rich, forgotten information in there that I think people will get a lot of value out of, and will give them some new insights around not only these virtues, but then I go into how do we integrate these? What are practices that we can take on? And then I even finished the book. This is like I shouldn't call it an Easter egg, but it's a unique thing, I think, done in a Bitcoin book, where I wrote a 10,000 word story essentially at the end of the book in the visions of the future section. I had originally started writing like an abstract, you know, future governance and how things are going to run and future economics and all this kind of crap. But my editor, John, he was like, dude, you're just giving us fucking 150,000 words of abstract nonfiction. He's like, give us a fiction story, paint a picture of what the future is going to look like based on Bitcoin winning and how it looks. So there's a story in there called The Sovereign Cross, which is set in the year 2084. 100 years from Orwell's book, and it looks at what the world looks like with basically the line dividing the new world called the executive states, which include things like the Free State of Texas, which seceded from the US, and like the Central American Coalition, which Bukele's grandson runs, in, you know, which is now like Salvador is like basically grown. There's like all these other free executive states that form a network that is the new world versus the old globalist UN, whose capital is Brussels, and all this sort of shit. So anyway, there's a cool story there that kind of ties all of these ideas together into a vision of what the future might look like.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think that there's something to the fiction perspective, right? That just captures people's imaginations and really gets them pulled in. It pulled into a whole world, and also the narrative that you're trying to form. And I find that, what's that book? I'm losing the name of it. It's like the one Odell always talks about, but yeah,
Mandibles?
Yeah, Mandibles.
Mandibles.
Yeah, and that book, like, you know, doesn't really have anything to do with Bitcoin, but it paints such a good picture. And I think coming from the Bitcoin perspective, you get like your mind starts running through all of that and thinking about a world in Bitcoin. And on another note, the fictional story that you kind of conjured up, I'm curious, like, what, if you could maybe tease us a little bit on like what you involved in there, and what kind of, like, I guess some of the principles that are embodied in that future time period, maybe how the governments of like that Free State of Texas are functioning. Because I know you have mentioned, and I share a similar view, where I think that for individuals to become more free and prosperous, I think we need to decentralize governance a little bit more. And I think that if we saw, like in the US, for example, more power go to the states, and maybe even in the counties, where we could have more executive power in these small jurisdictions, we could see a lot more freedom and just wealth and prosperity generated because of the the saying, the government that governs the smallest governs the best, right? And when you try to govern one size fits all for an entire nation like the U.S., it just ends up inevitably being inefficient. So I'm curious if you have anything you'd like to share on that, and maybe some of those maybe your ideas of like functional political systems going into the future with Bitcoin.
Yeah. So the story took me 10 fucking rewrites because I'm not a story writer, and it was the first time I've ever tried to write fiction in my life, and it was brutal, honestly. Like I'd write something, I thought it was great, and then John was like, "Dude, this fucking sucks, dude." And then I have to go back and like rewrite and change it, and then I'd send it back. I'm like, "What do you think now?" And he's like, "Yeah, nah, 2 out of 10." I was like, "Fuck." So it took a while, and the first versions were a little bit more focused on what you just mentioned, where they were more descriptive in the sense that I spoke about, like, almost wrote it as like the main character reminiscing on what had happened. It talks about like the Great Bifurcation and the big war of the 2050s, and how states separated who had different economic models, and those that were more localized prospered, and there was the ones who wanted larger globalist government. They kind of coalesced together, and they have basically this centralized large scale city surrounded by quite a bit of kind of like almost shantytown poverty that stretches outwards. And like I kind of try to paint this picture, but then I ended up moving away from the description, made it more about a story of the difference in the principles between the kind of people that live in each one. So the protagonist of the story is actually he's a smuggler, quote unquote, who is moving things between one of the executive states into the UN, into the old world, and he's moving things between them because there's the old UN, the old world, the UN doesn't recognize the executive states as sovereign states, so they refuse to trade with them. But all the trade happens under the table, and the people who do a lot of the trade with the executive states are actually political officials in the UN. So there's like corrupt, crooked fucks who, on the surface, say that we should not be dealing with these people, but under the hood they buy that stuff because the technology that they need in order to survive and compete and do all that sort of stuff, they can't develop internally anymore because they don't have the necessary skill sets. So I kind of talk about how they're buying like a series of like high-end brain computer chip interfaces, which are only developed in the executive state and all this sort of stuff. And then I don't want to give away too much of the plot here, but basically some shit goes wrong, like classic fucking backstabbing that you get only from a leftist. And I kind of like, it goes on this whole like journey and fuck up. And then I, play around with how the protagonist gets out of the mess and ends up back in the executive state. And I juxtapose like how the two places look, smell, feel, and all this kind of thing. A little bit about how the executive states very like green in a sense because they've managed to integrate things. This is like I've got Easter eggs in there. Like there's cows and fields everywhere because they figured out how to use cow shit properly to nurture the soil and develop like all this stuff. So there's like, it's the kind of like gives people a mental image of these two different worlds and the two different behaviors that led to the two different worlds. So that way people can sort of think about all of the virtues and all the principles and everything I discussed throughout the book, and then see what that extrapolation might potentially lead to in the future.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to that section of the book and reading that through. Nathan, did you have anything you wanted to ask or add to that?
No, I'd like to continue there more, but I'm really just enjoying this conversation. And I'm always so fascinated about the power of just like fictional narratives to actually communicate really complex philosophical ideals. So loving it. Please continue, guys.
Yeah. So I'm also a little curious as far as political philosophy goes. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you have mentioned like the birth of liberalism, the French Revolution, and kind of all of this this slow progression towards, I know Nietzsche covers a lot of this stuff, right? Like it's all kind of intertwined in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious
Mhm.
what your thoughts are as far as, so one thing I'll give you a little bit of filler too. One of the things that I don't remember where you mentioned it, but it sparked in my memory reading the Democracy, the God That Failed by Hoppe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he has a shorter version of the book. I forget what it's called. I think it's like From Aristocracy to Monarchy to Democracy, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a short little essay almost. You can read it really quick about like the thesis of that larger book. And I remember my worldview kind of like falling apart after that. And it kind of ties into the whole libertarian worldview, right? Of like,
Yeah.
just like freedom maximalism isn't necessarily the ideal outcome, right? Like maybe there is some credence and legitimacy to a government, and it's just the world that we're living in right now and the way the government operates that makes us so skeptical of government in general, right? But maybe not throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm curious, like all that stuff. I kind of just threw a lot at you there, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on all that.
Okay, give me a specific starting point. Where would you like me to angle this?
Yeah, so how about we start with your views on just liberalism in the sense of classical liberalism, like starting from the French Revolution, maybe not like modern leftist politics. Your thoughts on that, and tying into whatever else you'd like as far as like Hoppe goes, because I know that you obviously draw a lot from him.
Yep.
Yeah, go for it, wherever you want to start.
Yeah, I think Hoppe is like the only Austrian that I take seriously now. I've kind of like, I mean, you know, I get all of the theory and all of that stuff from the others, but there's not a lot of practicality. I've come to believe in a lot of that thought. Whereas, yeah, in the end of the book, I talk about a concept of Christo-Hoppe-Nietzscheanism. So some sort of Venn diagram between the three as the ultimate kind of way of being, because, you know, Hoppe provides the practical economic element. Christianity provides the, you know, the ethical spiritual element. Nietzsche provides the vitalist, like energetic element to it also. If you can find the Venn diagram between those three, there's probably a strong way of being, a strong way of operating. I want to read a quote. There it is. It is tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire. And for me, the more I studied history over the last couple of years, particularly like reading about the French Revolution and liberalism and all this sort of stuff, the more I came to believe that even classical liberalism, I don't want to say it was a mistake. It was something that we needed to experiment and try. And, you know, maybe in some ways there was, you know, restrictions on liberty and freedom that didn't make sense. But the older I get and the more I see the damage that sort of the liberal approach brings to civilization, the more I think that we probably naively ignored a lot of what the traditionalists and conservatives helped establish, like norms and things like that. Like one example, and this one gets people triggered, but things like primogeniture, right? Like passing all of the assets onto the firstborn son. And this was something that was overturned, particularly in the French Revolution. And a lot of people are like, oh yeah, well that's good because now, you know, all of the children get a bit of the assets. Now, what they don't think about is what that does to the family. So traditionally speaking, the system, the model that worked, that actually built fucking civilization from the Roman times, that allowed us to compound capital over hundreds and hundreds of years, was that the responsibility of managing the family's wealth and funds went to one person, which was the eldest son, because responsibility, first of all, is a masculine trait. Like it's something that you bear, right? First of all. Second of all, dealing with money is a far more masculine thing. Third of all, it's often the firstborn son, genetically, temperamentally, etc. speaking, that is the one who has the predisposition or is kind of like almost, I don't know what it is, like if it's endowed by God or if it's just the way they're born or whatever, but they generally are more predisposed to carrying the weight of keeping the family line alive and the family wealth, etc. Now, sometimes that could go wrong, of course. Sometimes the oldest brother could be an absolute cunt or whatever, and he wasn't trained for that. But the price to pay for that was that the family's wealth or the poor decision by the father or whatever the case might have been would be paid for by generational mishap. And the other children could go and like what often happened was the second son or whatever would become more of an artist, and he would be either funded by his brother or he would become an entrepreneur, he would become a merchant, he would go and build something of his own, and it created a different character in him. And the girls were not set with the expectation or the responsibility to have to take care of the family. After this got removed, you had infighting, you had families torn up, you had disagreements, you had fucking chaos basically inside the family, and the gradual erosion and destruction of dynastic wealth or hereditary wealth, right? And it was only after this that things like death taxes and all this sort of other shit came in, because you basically slowly gave the state a say. Like before that, the state didn't have a say. It was like the father gave it to the firstborn son. There was nobody who could tell you now. And then after that was, the creation of wills and all this other fucking garbage and junk that complicated things. So I'm using this as one example. There's many other examples, like the institution of divorce, and then like, universal suffrage and all this other crap that sort of like started to creep in with the movements, whether it was classical liberalism or the more modern variations and flavors that untangled a lot of norms and processes and traditions that kept culture and civilization strong and tight and robust. And I don't know, like there's many arguments for and against, but I don't know how much damage we did with both classical liberalism and, I mean, we could definitely see what it's turned into. We know that that's certainly damaging to individuals, to culture. Like you look at things like whether it's the birth rate or how many people are depressed, how many people are lonely, and testosterone levels, and all of the other markers. Other than like, the fact that technology has sort of like continued to increase and made quality of life better in that dimension, every other dimension seems to have decreased, right? Every other metric, every other measure. So, that seems to correlate quite well with the rise of liberalism in any flavor. So it's a I'll sum it up by saying it's a tricky one. My views are liberalism, every other flavor, even libertarianism and all this sort of stuff. I'm a little bit jaded with all of that. I think there's definitely a stronger place and a stronger desire for traditionalism and conservatism as concepts to come up. And maybe the best approach is to be like a conservative libertarian, somewhere in there, which is, people need to be somewhat free to choose, but there needs to be social and territorial norms that are enforced that make sense because they conserve elements that are worth conserving, instead of having to fucking blow our shit up every generation.
Yeah. And I ask it because, I spent most of my 20s, down that anarcho-capitalist libertarian rabbit hole. And I totally sympathize with it. And I wouldn't even say I disagree with it, but I think that like Hoppe proposes some interesting arguments for like why monarchy is better than democracy that I don't think you really learn in your traditional education. That's very interesting. It lends a lot of insight to the system that we're in right now. And I like to have my views challenged. I don't want to just assume that I'm right and take this high road of like, oh yeah, I figured it out. I figured out, political philosophy, right? Anarcho-capitalism is like the correct thing in all circumstances. And I think that that's just something that people, upon like examining and questioning, having that humility to assume that they might be wrong about it is healthy. And I see that like there's a lot to learn. Like that's really all I can say about it. Like there's just so many things that I think as you age, you start to realize there's more than just freedom, right?
Totally.
Especially having a child. I think like there's certain things I just wouldn't want my child to do, right? And I don't want him to do drugs, but should they be legal in society? It's like, well, that is a different question when you have kids and when you don't. So
yes,
it's interesting. I'd rather in an ideal world, have in that example like you have the freedom, I guess, to do it, but it be culturally looked
frowned upon. Yeah.
And I don't know like that line, like how far do you push that line, right? But it's all interesting stuff. But I guess to tie it back to Bitcoin a little bit, how do you see Bitcoin shaping people's own moralities and their worldviews? Because we talk a lot about in the Bitcoin space about how Bitcoin changes you, right? And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. But I also think that we change just, throughout life as in general. So I'm curious, like what you think, like, how is society going to change because of Bitcoin and maybe just already on its own path without Bitcoin?
Yeah, interesting. So I'm going to try and give you a unconventional, unorthodox answer because I guess that's what I do. But I've become less convinced that Bitcoin changes us as much as I used to think, right? Like I used to think Bitcoin really changes people and lowers their time preference, and then all of a sudden they become more virtuous and all this sort of shit. And I mean, I think that's true for some people, but I actually think you have to have had a predisposition for longer term thinking to have found Bitcoin in the first place and for it to have had that effect on you. So I don't know if it changes you as much as maybe unlocks something you had in you already, because there's many people that I know that found Bitcoin, became fucking degenerates, junkies, drug dealers, shitcoiners, whatever, right? And there's probably actually more of those, if I'm honest with myself, than people that have so-called become virtuous. Now, what I think actually had a bigger impact on us, and it's a hypothesis that I'm in the process of developing, is Twitter actually. And what Twitter did was it created a common space for people who shared an interest, which was Bitcoin, to, basically iron sharpens iron, like to talk about ideas, to discover new trends. And we were adjacent enough or had Bitcoiners who were interested in things like, better food or, thinking about sovereignty and all this sort of shit. So there was like, it was related enough to these other things where all of a sudden we fell into these other rabbit holes and we promoted these other rabbit holes. We mentioned them we mentioned them on Twitter. So then other Bitcoiners which had interest found these things, and Twitter enabled us to kind of transform our lives more than I think Bitcoin alone did. I'm very skeptical that if Twitter didn't exist, and particularly the Bitcoin Twitter circle, which is adjacent to other interesting circles, if that didn't exist, I'm not sure we'd see the same kind of lowering of time preference and re-evaluation of values as we've seen. Like if we were all in a silo and we all had Bitcoin and somehow something like Twitter didn't exist, I'm not sure we would have had the same outcome. So anyway, long way of saying, I think Bitcoin certainly does have an impact. It certainly does attract people with a predisposition for either having a low time preference already or wanting to lower their time preference. I think the effect of that is going to be such that those people are more rewarded on a Bitcoin standard, and as such become richer, more influential, more powerful, and therefore inspire other people to potentially change their behavior to be more low time preference. And if these people have followings or influence, etc., in the social world, then that'll probably disseminate in a social capacity like something on X. But it's certainly, in my mind, I've come to believe it's not Bitcoin alone. It's more the fact that we're interconnected on a public square like Twitter. So long answer, but it's more nuanced than Bitcoin fixes this, I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I
just want to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it's funny because I was listening to another podcast recently, and they were talking about how, of course, Bitcoin fixes everything, but it doesn't fix people. And I actually I'm toying with, but I haven't fully teased out that I actually do think that Bitcoin fixes everything, including people. Now, it might not ever be perfected, but it's kind of like that trend to zero, like it's forever getting smaller. But I wasn't thinking of it in the the individual sense, meaning that like it would take a person and perhaps fix them. I was more thinking of like what would the implications be over time, generationally, in terms of improving humanity. And the ones that really stuck out to me, that whether, and I got to tease out now this idea that it's more the communication methods, if it's Twitter and the social sphere, to see, I got to try and separate these two out. But what I was playing around with was the idea that in the Bitcoin space, we see people with better nutrition. We see people with similar value alignments, and kind of there's definitely personality traits which are somewhat genetic as well too. So the things that I think would be steering humanity into a better direction, Bitcoin selecting for in terms of better nutrition, there'd be gene selection pressures. And then the other one in terms of improving humanity, I think is really important. And we see it in like particularly the homeschooling space, is Bitcoiners are some of the best peaceful parents that I've ever met. They're really conscientious of parenting. And if I can take the flip side of it, is that I think that a lot of we would consider maybe bad or deceitful or negative behaviors from people, the evil or criminal. And a lot of those circumstances, you can trace it back to an abusive or neglectful childhood. It's very, very common element. And I'm thinking about basically the idea of Bitcoin fixing people, but it's more generational in terms of peaceful voluntary pairing, better food, and kind of better personality trait propagation. I'm just curious your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and that's a generational thing, and I think that's, I mean, the funny thing is you get fucking called a eugenicist for talking about this kind of stuff, because you're like, okay, we want to get better generationally, and you want to basically enhance. Like I make fun of this. I wrote an article a number of years ago called what was it, Fire Bitcoin Teleportation. I talked about how we're going to have Homo Bitcoinicus and Homo Hystericus. Like the Homo sapiens is going to split into two things, and the Hystericus version of Homo sapiens is going to turn into this fucking soy eating, fucking vaccine injecting, no sunlight bug man, while Bitcoiners are going to turn into this like wealthy, sunshine laden, raw milk drinking superhuman, right? So basically like almost similar to the Ubermensch and the Untermensch, right? And I was very convinced that, Bitcoin would be the fundamental driver of that. But since I've been out of the Bitcoin space for a while, I've actually found people that are not into Bitcoin, but that are really into homeschooling, really into strength and fitness, and really into strong values, and all of these other things that we, I think, have convinced ourselves in Bitcoin only exist in Bitcoin, or primarily exist in Bitcoin. In fact, I found way more base people outside of Bitcoin than I have found in Bitcoin over the last 12 months. Way smarter people, way more intellectual people, all this sort of stuff. So to me, basically, I found a whole series of data points which showed me that it wasn't actually Bitcoin that was the factor. It was that they were either connected through something like X or Substack, or something similar like that, where they were able to share those ideas and actually improve upon each other, or improve upon them. And basically, again, iron sharpening iron. And there was no Bitcoin to be heard of. In fact, many of them didn't like the idea of Bitcoin. And I've kind of tried to come and bring Bitcoin into those circles. So anyway, it's just again, I'm still formulating this hypothesis. I don't know how accurate or true it is. I think ultimately, whether Bitcoin or not, I mean, before we had Bitcoin, you had these aristocratic classes. Like the original notion of being aristocratic or noble was to be well-bred, and well-bred meant that over the generations, you select intelligently. Like, when fathers used to select who their daughter would be married to, right? Yeah, like, there was a reason behind that. It wasn't just to fucking force your damn daughter into like marrying some dickhead. Like, that wasn't the point, right? The point was to increase the likelihood of a successful marriage and all that sort of stuff. And this ties again into the previous question about liberalism. Like, liberalism did away with all of that and put, got a bunch of young people who don't know fucking their ass from their face to decide who they should marry, and we wonder why divorce rates are up, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
it's doing it for the wrong reason. So short-term, so excited. Sorry.
Exactly. So anyway, I guess it remains to be seen, will those who hold Bitcoin, because they are more economically sound, will they have the mental and psychological space to make these better decisions across the other areas of life? And my guess is still probably yes. but there's a whole section in the book which asks the question, does wealth corrupt? And I grapple with this idea of like, hey, maybe those with Bitcoin and who inherit Bitcoin, who are born to Bitcoin, etc., and are quite wealthy, maybe they just fall into the same fucking entitlement trap, and they have libertarian or liberal fucking desire all of a sudden to be like, well, fuck you, dad, fuck you, mum, I'm gonna go and do my own thing, and then they squander everything. I don't know. So yeah, I'm no longer as convinced as I used to be that Bitcoin sorts that out. Well, that Bitcoin is the differentiator.
I'm curious, dude. Like, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that last thing you said points to just the fact of human nature, that I think that we humans have like seasons in their own lives, and then also generations are seasonal. And I think that it's not it's a feature, not a bug, right? Like, I think that it's okay for us to like make mistakes as a species. Right? And yeah, like if my children act a certain way in response to the way that I was raised, I raised them, and then also the world they grew up in, all those things are going to have an impact, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think that it just needs to be, informed, and certain things do need to be protected, right? And to another point that you were saying earlier, I think that there's definitely a cultural shift going on, and I see a lot more of the, for lack of a better word, like conservatism, I kind of come back, especially in the US. I think people are less afraid to admit that they're, pro-nuclear family, and they want to go back to the traditional components, right? And I think that a place like X, a social media site like that, allows those conversations to happen, and also is just a great platform in and of itself to have the conversations because of the nature of it. So yeah, I mean, I really just wanted to add that on there. Nathan, did you have something you want to say there?
No, I'm just sitting back and kind of thinking about the idea of like, okay, maybe I'm trying to think of what in us, or in perhaps, like, this is really kind of weird. So for example, if acting in honest and virtuous ways is a more successful strategy to bear out over time, I'm wondering if something like Bitcoin just prevents those from acting in that sort of manner from getting unjustly rugged, and then allowing them and their ideals to propagate more. Like, I wonder if Bitcoin isn't necessarily potentially as much or strictly the cause, but if it protects it from being derailed. And specifically, and I know
you
we're
are on the right track.
Yeah, and specifically, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. I was curious in the historical examples that you have when you're looking back at the different virtues. I was trying to figure out what caused them to derail. Why, if they were of value and utility and in use, why did we lose them? I don't know if you have any insight, but that's just where I was thinking.
Yeah, so let me just say the first one first is you're 100% on the right track, because that's the next question that comes following what we just said, is like, when you find some evidence contrary, like, okay, maybe this is not the thing. So like, what the fuck does Bitcoin do? And the best answer I've come up with is, I'm calling it a framework for excellence. And the definition of excellence is like the ability to produce something exceptional and create something outside of the range of normal or average. And that is what moves the world forward. And I think if we appropriately reward excellence, we ideally should be able to move the world closer to beauty, truth, goodness, and all that sort of stuff, right? And I think Bitcoin is a framework for that. So as you sort of said, it doesn't necessarily have to be a cause, but it could be almost like a bounding box or a paradigm in which that is better rewarded, right? And that's kind of how I think about the book now. It's like, all right, the paradigm we live in now, call it the fiat paradigm, it requires a different kind of playbook. Yes, you can potentially succeed by doing the right thing, but more often than not, you want to kind of find a way to steal, rob, lie, cheat, whatever, like get into politics, bureaucrating, etc. And that's the sort of playbook on a fiat standard. But on a Bitcoin standard, there's a different set of rules and a different set of virtues that are necessary in order for you to succeed. So I kind of think of it as a playbook to win on a Bitcoin standard, or a code of virtue for a world on a new socioeconomic standard. That's kind of what the subtitle of the book is. So with that, to lead into your second question, why did this shit derail in the past? Well, I think part of it was to do with the liberal experiment. Part of it was to do with the generational cycles and the the entitlement that generally sort of bubbles up. Part of it was to do with the the rise of the merchant class across all of these things, and the trader class more accurately. And part of it was to do with the fact that the money could be somewhat broken. Part of it was to do with the democratic experiment and the idea of universal suffrage. So there was many reasons. Part of it was because technology fundamentally shifted and it changed the the mega politics of violence and all this sort of stuff. So I think there's many reasons why, and I think in many ways the last couple hundred years have been an experiment, not only technologically speaking, but socially and morally speaking, all these other things, to see what would happen. And I think if we do the right thing moving forward, I think we've kind of learned some lessons out of that and can kind of combine the rise of sound money, hopefully with the rise of sound principles and sound virtues and sound ways of living. And if we do that, there's probably a strong confluence there that would, I don't know, maybe bring us into somewhat of a golden age. And until we come up with the next fucking problem 500 years from now, and then we blow everything up again. And I'm sure, but that's their problem to deal with. Like, we've got our own shit to deal with right now. We've got Clown World version 1 that we've got to sort out. And yeah, my hope is that we can do it in some way. So anyway, that's my best answer for your last two questions.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just want to quickly tag onto the end there, because I had a conversation with another friend recently, and we were talking about Bitcoin and just piece specifically, but your comment about we'll have some other problem down the road. Humans will always have conflict on the individual level. We'll always have problems on the individual level. So of course it's going to exist on the aggregate, just hopefully the scale's smaller. Anyways, I just wanted to throw that in there at the end. Ed, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, I don't know who said it, but, give humans utopia and they'll find a way to destroy it.
Totally.
Yeah. We're never content when there's nothing to build towards. Right. So if we have everything we need, we need like that adventure and that, struggle to
problems are an opportunity, right? Like I think the focus, and I learned this one from Tony Robbins actually, is that the focus should be on the quality of the problem. Like, so, if your problem is, I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna, I don't know how to get food, right? I'm gonna die of starvation, versus I don't know if I should have eggs or if I should have fucking a burger this morning. Like they're both a similar kind of problem, but a very different quality of problem. So what we should be seeking to do is increasing the quality of problem as much as we can. And the nature of reality is that things will ebb and flow, and there'll be times when the quality of problem gets really dumb. Like at the moment, one of the qualities of problems that we're dealing with is how many fucking genders do we have? Like that's about the dumbest quality problem you could possibly fucking imagine, and we're dealing with that kind of shit at the moment. So my hope is that we'll kind of like raise the bar a little bit and deal with better quality of problems. Should we get the money sorted out, and should we, more importantly, in my opinion, get the virtues and the behaviors sorted out amongst the people who will have socioeconomic influence, which ideally are Bitcoiners. Because my target market for this book is still Bitcoiners, obviously, because I just think that, or at least I don't even want to say I know that we're going to be the rich fuckers out of this. Like we're going to be the wealthy people. And what I'm hoping is I can do my small part in nudging those people in a better direction, because the last thing we need is a bunch of dickheads and overgrown children in positions of socioeconomic power. So yeah,
I
completely agree
with that. Yeah, well, I want to be respectful of your time, Alex. I really appreciate you coming to chat with us. Is there anything you'd like to just end this the audience with? Maybe some information about where they can find you. Maybe like obviously your book, and anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to pick up the book, it's finally available on Amazon. They can pick it up. I mean, I highly recommend the hardcover. It's 530 pages. It's about 2.5 pounds. It's a great protection. If someone breaks into your house coming to get your Bitcoin, you just throw the fucking book at them, and you will be saved from the $8 wrench attack with a $39 book fucking to the face. So it's jokes aside though, it's a beautiful book. It's big, nice, heavy. It's the kind of thing you want to buy in hardcover. And if you want to buy it in Bitcoin Direct, I'm going to produce a special edition hardcover with thicker paper and color print on the inside. So if you want that, reach out to me. I can't do that on Amazon, unfortunately, because they don't provide the service. So I have to print it separately. And if you want to check out more about Atlantis as well, ghostlatlantis.io. I'm going to be starting to get back on the podcasting circuit and talking about that starting in December and really kicking it off in January. So if people want to connect with Bitcoiners, sovereign individuals, and all that sort of stuff, if any of that's of interest, like events and merchants and venues and all this sort of stuff, go and check that out. It's still early days, but it's a cool thing to be working on, and hopefully a cool thing for people to play around with.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you spending the time. I said again, everyone listening, make sure you give him a follow on here and check out the book. It's great so far from what I've read. And if you want to follow me and the Bitcoin Mentor handle, you can be notified when we do this space every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern time. We are part of Bitcoin Mentor, and you can learn more at bitcoinmentor.io. Email one of us, book a free session, and learn about how we can help you with your Bitcoin journey. Anything from self-custodying your Bitcoin, running a node. If you're a beginner, you just bought some Bitcoin on exchange, now's the time to self-custody your Bitcoin. I know a lot of new people coming into the space right now, and they need that help getting those first few steps down. But yeah, so everybody, hope you have a great holiday for you guys that are celebrating Thanksgiving. And we will be here on Friday to chat again. So till then, take care, guys.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us, Svetski.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.